That's hard to convince people of the world of that. I tell my students, the mathematics that you study is smarter than you are. The simplest mathematics is smarter than you are. And I said nature is smarter than we are. But man doesn't believe that. We think we're smarter than just the smartest thing ever, you know. That's the vanity of the human mind. That's sort of like the Moabite. Yahweh talked about the Moab was so arrogant. Of course, he's going to be one of the heads of the beast, you know. But so this is Joshua speaking. This is the greatest genius of all time that's walked the face of this earth. And he's able to take everything else in that law and give you two basic ideas that everything else depends on. And if you apply this, you're going to have society that will never run down. It will never have terrorists in the streets. You're not going to have ghettos. You're not going to have gangs running rampant in LA. You're going to have water that's not polluted. You're going to have crops that are bountiful. You're not going to have uncircumcised fruit. All these things are going to be solved. Take another example. Suppose you grow fruit. You have some fruit trees, and you decide you're going to sell the fruit. And so the first year it bears good-looking apples. It's probably what happened with Eve and Adam. She picked the fruit prematurely. It wasn't ready to be eaten. It did something to her, see. Yahweh said, of the tree of the garden, in the tree in the midst of the garden, you shall not eat. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. Why did he forbid her to do that? It was uncircumcised fruit. Otherwise, he would have allowed it. But see, I believe the only way I know how to interpret that is to use the law to interpret why it created a problem with her. Ate the apple and her eyes were, well, I don't know if it was apple or not, but ate the fruit and her eyes were, quote, opened. Uncircumcised fruit affects the human mind. So let's say you're a fruit grower. Second year the trees grow, looks like a good bumper crop, you're going to sell them. Is it okay to sell them to your neighbor? Love your neighbor as yourself. I'm going to give him a good deal. I'm going to give him half price on this bushel of apples. I'm loving my neighbor as myself. Is he or not? No, he's not. He feels like he is. The guy that's buying the apples he feels like it's a good deal. So both parties agree. They feel like they've made a good deal and everybody goes away happy. Only problem is they broke the law. They broke the second of the greatest commandments in all the law. Love your neighbor as yourself. How do you love your neighbor? You do him no wrong. The person who grew those apples, they did wrong to the guy who bought them because they were uncircumcised. He is going to affect that guy's mind in a way he doesn't even comprehend. He's damaging his neighbor, but he doesn't know it because he's ignorant of the laws regarding the tree Sabbath. See, these are just things that people would never in 1,000 years dream is part of this second commandment. But you don't know that unless you know the law. And why would you want to know the law? Rule number 1, love Yahweh with all your heart, soul, and mind, and all your strength. If you do that, you will find out, Yahweh will reveal to you the laws in that book, and you'll know how to treat your neighbor. You see, it's much more complicated, much more involved, and the rules of the game have not changed in 1,000, 5,000, 6,000 years. It affected Eve. It's caused the human race problems from then on, and it still causes the human race problems. It's hard to know. Unless you grew all your own food, all your own fruit, then you could know if things have been complied with. How do you know if food is grown in the land Sabbath, planted in the land Sabbath, reaped? You can reap in the land Sabbath, you can't sow in it. Well, those are things that are going to be solved when Yahshua returns with his kingdom to set up his kingdom. He's going to solve these problems in ways the human race never imagined because their conscience is badly educated. Very important. Why did Yahshua say the second is like unto? Why would he say like unto it? One reason is it has this important word in there called love. Verse 37, you shall love Yahweh with all your heart, soul, and mind. Verse 39, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Let's go back to the first commandment. That's what we have to do, the great commandment. If we can understand that, it'll help us understand the second one. What is the love of Yahweh? How do you love Yahweh? Well, I said, you'll study his law, you'll know his law, but what does the Bible say over in 1 John 5 and verse 3? This is a verse we all should know. We should know where it is. We should know it's in one of the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd John. We should know that much. But there are certain scriptures that are good to know so that we know about where to find it. We may not always know the exact verse, but 1 John 5 and verse 3, you've heard it before. Verse 3, for this is the love of Yahweh. Is it a warm feeling in your heart? That should be there, an emotional tie with Yahweh. I feel like Yahweh has been basically the only father I've ever had that was a father to me throughout my life. I think there should be an emotional tie there with Yahweh. This is the love of Yahweh, that we keep his commandments, verse 3 of chapter 5, 1 John. And, by the way, John says, his commandments are not grievous, regardless of what you've heard. Regardless of the bad press it's gotten, they're not grievous. That's why Paul called them the perfect law of liberty. It liberates you not from the law, it liberates you from the consequences of sin. That's why it's the perfect law of liberty. You want that. That's what the human race is looking for. They're desperately looking, yearning, desiring to know, to be free of the consequences of sin. They just don't know that that's what it is. They don't know what they're looking for. No, life is topsy-turvy, the weather's topsy-turvy, the economy is tanking in lots of different places, and this is true globally, it's just not here. Why? The consequences of sin. People want to be free. You hear people talk about, this is obviously a highly political year. You hear people interviewed, they're talking about they're losing their home. It's either food or rent, you decide. And all these economic woes, and we're super blessed. We're very blessed in a rough economy to be doing as well as we are. But there are a lot of people, 23, 25 million people, that are not doing well. That's a lot of people. That's nearly 10% of our population. What's the problem? They want to be free from the consequences of sin, but they call it something else. Free from this bad law or that bad, I'm talking about civil statutes, from this governmental regulation or that governmental regulation. They think that's what they want to be free from. They want to be free from the consequences of breaking Yahweh's law. That's what the human race is longing for, but don't know what it is. And that's part of our job, is to show them the way, that this is the way, this is the ticket to freedom from the consequences of sin. It's not grievous. It's just the opposite. It's a glorious thing. Verse 3, the love of Yahweh is to keep his commandments. Now let's go back to verse 2. By this we know that we love the children of Yahweh. How do you know? You see, I can't emphasize this enough, and sometimes it may seem I'm maybe a little too unemotional about it. But see, you have to get outside human emotions, because human emotions are not a gauge of what is right and wrong. It's a gauge of how we feel. It's not a standard in itself, but it becomes a standard in itself. So how do we know that we love the children of Yahweh? How do we know we love each other in the church? How do we know? When we love Yahweh and keep his commandments. That's how we know. If we do that first, we are going to love our neighbor as ourselves. Would you want to be cheated? No. Has anything ever been stolen from you? I've had things stolen from me. Do you like it? You don't like it. But that's just one area. There's all these other things, I just alluded to some of them, that are involved in keeping this commandment properly. So this goes back to the second of the two great commandments. Love your neighbor as yourself. How do you know that you are? See, it goes back to the first commandment again. How do you know that you love your neighbor as yourself? If you don't know the first commandment, and you don't love Yahweh and keep his commandments, you don't know if you're loving your neighbor as yourself or not. You may feel that you are. It's a feeling. Is it authentic? And sometimes, obviously, because of our emotional responses, we make the right response to our neighbor, because we know how much it hurts when we were treated that way, so we don't want to treat somebody else that way. But is that a gauge every time? Is that the standard? No. Like I mentioned, uncircumcised fruit seems totally outside the range of human emotions, but it still gets to the point of loving your neighbor as yourself. Would you want to be damaged by uncircumcised fruit because some ignorant guy sold it to you? Would you want that done to you? No, we wouldn't. We don't want to be damaged ourselves, so we wouldn't want to do that to somebody else, you see. So once we know what the right reaction is, then we know how to treat our neighbor. But until we know what the right reaction is, we don't know. Like I said, we're not born with the 616 commandments encoded in our DNA structure. It's just not there. That's why we have to be taught these things. And so I just want to go over some of those things to make the emphasis on how these two are so intimately connected that you can't have the second one without having the first one.